I was the outcast no one wanted at the table, until the inheritance turned me into the only relative that mattered. Growing up, I was the mistake nobody talked about. Mom had me at 16 with some guy who vanished before I could walk. While my cousins got birthday parties and Christmas presents, I got hand-me-downs and backhanded comments about being the charity case. Every family gathering was the same humiliating routine. I'd sit at the kids' table until I was 18, then got moved to the corner of the adult table where conversations died when I tried to join. My aunt would pat my head and say things like, "Well, at least someone's getting use out of those old clothes." My uncle would avoid eye contact entirely. The worst part was watching them plan futures I'd never be part of. College funds for their kids while I worked double shifts at the grocery store. Family vacations I was never invited to. Business opportunities passed around like dessert while I sat there invisible. My cousin Brittany got a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday. I got a lecture about being grateful for the used bicycle they'd found at a garage sale. When she graduated high school, the family threw a catered party with a photographer. When I graduated, my aunt sent a card with $5 inside. The pattern continued through college. While Brittany and my other cousins got their tuition paid in full, I took out student loans that would follow me for decades. I worked 3 jobs just to afford ramen noodles and used textbooks. During Christmas breaks, I'd see their social media posts from ski trips while I picked up extra shifts at the diner. Blood is thicker than water, my uncle would say whenever someone questioned the family dynamics, but apparently my blood was too diluted to count. When great-grandfather Elias died at 97, nobody expected me at the funeral. I almost didn't go. But something made me drive the 4 hours to his massive estate, the one where I'd spent exactly 3 childhood visits being told not to touch anything valuable. He'd been the family patriarch, the one whose timber company had built the fortune everyone lived off. I remembered him as a stern man who spoke little but observed everything with sharp gray eyes. During those rare visits, he'd watch me from his leather armchair while the other kids ran wild through his house. The funeral was exactly what I expected. My relatives clustering together in their expensive black outfits, whispering about funeral arrangements and estate plans like vultures. I stood in the back wearing a thrift store dress, feeling like an intruder at my own great-grandfather's service. After the burial, everyone gathered at his house for the reading of the will. I almost left, but the lawyer specifically asked me to stay. My aunt shot me a look that could have melted steel. "Why is she here?" my uncle muttered. "She's not getting anything anyway." The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will. Properties in Vermont and Maine. Stock portfolios worth millions. The family business that had made everyone comfortable for generations. My aunt and uncle were practically salivating, already calculating their shares. Then came the bombshell that changed everything forever. To my great-granddaughter, the only one who never asked me for anything, I leave the entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $14 million. The room went dead silent. My cousin's mouth fell open. My uncle's face turned purple. My aunt started hyperventilating. "There must be a mistake," my uncle sputtered. The lawyer continued reading. "I watched this family treat her like garbage for 24 years. Now she gets to decide what they deserve." My phone started buzzing immediately. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to catch up. My aunt left a voicemail sobbing about how much she'd always loved me, but I wasn't done learning about great-grandfather Elias's final gift. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope marked, "Read this alone." Inside was a letter that revealed a family secret so dark, it explained everything about why they'd really kept me at arm's length. I couldn't fit what happens next in this short video. Watch the rest down below. Extended full version, approximately 100,000 plus characters. I was the outcast no one wanted at the table, until the inheritance turned me into the only relative that mattered. Growing up, I was the mistake nobody talked about. Mom had me at 16 with some guy who vanished before I could walk. While my cousins got birthday parties and Christmas presents, I got hand-me-downs and backhanded comments about being the charity case. Every family gathering was the same humiliating routine. I'd sit at the kids' table until I was 18, then got moved to the corner of the adult table where conversations died when I tried to join. My aunt would pat my head and say things like, "Well, at least someone's getting use out of those old clothes." My uncle would avoid eye contact entirely, as if acknowledging me might contaminate his perfect family image. The worst part was watching them plan futures I'd never be part of. College funds for their kids while I worked double shifts at the grocery store. Family vacations I was never invited to. Business opportunities passed around like dessert while I sat there invisible, counting down minutes until I could escape their suffocating presence. My cousin Brittany got a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday. I got a lecture about being grateful for the used bicycle they'd found at a garage sale. When she graduated high school, the family threw a catered party with a professional photographer and live band. When I graduated, my aunt sent a card with $5 inside and a note saying she was proud I'd managed to finish despite my circumstances. The psychological warfare was constant and subtle. They'd discuss family history that somehow never included my branch of the family tree. They'd plan reunions and then mention them casually afterward, as if forgetting to invite me was just an innocent oversight. They'd talk about family resemblances and genetic traits while pointedly avoiding any mention of who I might take after. Every holiday reinforced the hierarchy. Christmas morning at my aunt's house meant watching the other kids tear through mountains of expensive presents, while I got a single gift card and a lecture about appreciating what I had. Easter meant elaborate egg hunts with prizes for everyone except me, because they'd somehow miscounted the number of children attending. The pattern continued through college. While Brittany and my other cousins got their tuition paid in full, I took out student loans that would follow me for decades. I worked 3 jobs just to afford ramen noodles and used textbooks. During Christmas breaks, I'd see their social media posts from ski trips and beach resorts while I picked up extra shifts at the diner, serving families who looked exactly like mine, but actually included all their children. Even smaller family events reinforced my status as an outsider. When my cousin got engaged, the family threw an elaborate engagement party at the country club. I learned about it from Facebook photos posted the next day. When I got accepted to nursing school, nobody called to congratulate me. When I made the dean's list 3 semesters in a row, the achievement went unnoticed and uncelebrated by the people who should have been proudest. The financial disparities were staggering and deliberately displayed. My aunt would casually mention spending more on a single dinner at their country club than I made in a week. Brittany's Sweet 16 party cost more than my mom's annual rent. They'd discuss real estate investments and stock portfolios at family dinners while I calculated whether I could afford both groceries and gas for the week. When I turned 21, they took the family to Europe for 3 weeks, posting daily updates of their adventures in Paris and Rome. I worked at a summer camp making minimum wage, sleeping in a cabin with 8 other counselors, and dealing with homesick kids while watching their Instagram stories of museum visits and 5-star restaurants. When Brittany turned 21, they bought her a condo near her college as a birthday surprise, complete with furniture and a year's worth of HOA fees paid in advance. When I graduated nursing school, I moved back in with my mom because I couldn't afford the security deposit on an apartment and was drowning in student loan debt. The psychological impact was devastating and cumulative. I started every conversation assuming I'd be interrupted or dismissed. I developed a nervous habit of apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I'd spend hours rehearsing what I wanted to say at family gatherings, only to sit silent when the moment came. I began to believe their narrative that I was somehow less worthy of love and attention. My mom tried to make excuses for them, but her explanations grew weaker over the years. "They're just busy with their own lives," she'd say when I complained about being excluded. "They don't mean to hurt your feelings." But I watched her flinch every time my aunt made another cutting comment about our circumstances. I saw how she'd changed the subject whenever anyone asked about my father. There were moments when I caught glimpses of something deeper and more sinister in their treatment of me. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Meaningful looks exchanged when anyone mentioned my father. A tension that seemed to go beyond simple class differences or family dynamics. The whispered conversations became more frequent as I got older. I'd catch fragments of sentences that made no sense. References to keeping things quiet. Mentions of monthly payments and ongoing obligations, comments about how much longer they'd have to deal with the situation. When I was in high school, I overheard my uncle on the phone in his study. He was angry about something, talking about how the payments were bleeding them dry and how much longer this could go on. When he saw me in the doorway, his face went white, and he quickly hung up, claiming it was just business stress. "Blood is thicker than water," my uncle would say whenever someone questioned the family dynamics. But apparently my blood was too diluted to count for anything meaningful in their precious family hierarchy. The exclusion wasn't just social. It was systematic. I was never included in family business discussions, never consulted about major decisions that affected everyone, never given a voice in planning events I was expected to attend. I was treated like a charity case they were obligated to tolerate, rather than a family member with equal standing. When great-grandfather Elias died at 97, nobody expected me at the funeral. I almost didn't go, but something made me drive the 4 hours to his massive estate, the one where I'd spent exactly 3 childhood visits being told not to touch anything valuable. He'd been the family patriarch, the one whose timber company had built the fortune everyone lived off. I remembered him as a stern man who spoke little but observed everything with sharp gray eyes. During those rare visits, he'd watch me from his leather armchair while the other kids ran wild through his house, never getting scolded for their noise or mess. There was something different about how he looked at me, though. While the other adults treated me like a burden, great-grandfather Elias would study me with what almost seemed like respect. He never spoke much to any of us kids, but occasionally he'd nod at me with approval when I helped clear the table, or thanked my aunt for dinner. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The last time I'd seen him alive was 2 years earlier at Brittany's college graduation party. While everyone else celebrated and took photos, I'd found him sitting alone on the porch, looking tired and somehow disappointed. When I'd asked if he was okay, he'd looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Some people get what they deserve, and some people deserve better than what they get." I hadn't understood what he meant then. The funeral was exactly what I expected. My relatives clustering together in their expensive black outfits, whispering about funeral arrangements and estate plans like vultures circling fresh roadkill. I stood in the back wearing a dress I'd bought at a thrift store, feeling like an intruder at my own great-grandfather's service. My aunt wore designer black with pearls that probably cost more than my car. My uncle had flown in from his business trip, complaining loudly about the inconvenience of the timing. Brittany posted Instagram stories from the funeral, somehow making even grief look glamorous and photogenic with carefully chosen angles and filters. During the service, I found myself genuinely mourning great-grandfather Elias. He was the only family member who'd never made me feel small or unwanted. Even in his stern silence, there had been a kind of dignity in how he treated everyone equally with polite distance. He'd built something lasting and substantial, unlike the rest of the family who seemed content to live off his legacy without contributing anything meaningful. The minister spoke about great-grandfather Elias's commitment to family and justice, his belief that people should be judged by their character rather than their circumstances. I wondered if the family even listened to the words, or if they were too busy calculating their upcoming windfalls to pay attention. After the burial, everyone gathered at his house for the reading of the will. I almost left, but the lawyer specifically asked me to stay. My aunt shot me a look that could have melted steel. "Why is she here?" My uncle muttered to my aunt. "She's not getting anything anyway." The dismissal in his voice was so casual, so automatic, that it cut deeper than any deliberate insult could have. The house felt different without great-grandfather Elias, and smaller somehow despite being massive. I sat in a corner chair while the family arranged themselves prominently near the lawyer's desk, already positioning themselves for maximum inheritance impact, like actors hitting their marks for the most important scene of their lives. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will to my assembled relatives. Properties in Vermont and Maine worth millions. Stock portfolios that had grown steadily for decades. The family business that had made everyone comfortable for generations. My aunt and uncle were practically salivating, already calculating their shares and planning improvements to their lifestyle. Brittany was on her phone, probably already researching vacation destinations for her upcoming windfall. My uncle had pulled out a notepad and was actually taking notes about asset distribution, like he was in a business meeting. The greed in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and their barely concealed excitement was nauseating to witness. They discussed the various properties like items in a catalog. The vacation home in Vermont would go to my uncle, obviously, since he was the eldest son. The main cottage would be perfect for my aunt's retirement plans. The stock portfolio would be divided equally among the grandchildren, ensuring their financial security for life. Then came the bombshell that changed everything forever. To my great-granddaughter, the only one who never asked me for anything, I leave the entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $14 million. The room went dead silent. My cousin's mouth fell open so wide I could see her dental work. My uncle's face turned purple, then red, then an alarming shade of white. My aunt started hyperventilating, fanning herself with the funeral program while making small choking sounds. "There must be a mistake," my uncle sputtered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. The lawyer continued reading with professional calm. "I watched this family treat her like garbage for 24 years. She made her own way without asking for handouts or expecting special treatment. She worked multiple jobs through school while others relied on family money. She showed dignity and grace despite being systematically excluded and dismissed. She never complained, never demanded explanations, never threw tantrums when she was left out. Now she gets to decide what they deserve." That's when I realized great-grandfather Elias had been watching everything. Every dismissive comment. Every time they'd excluded me. Every moment they'd made me feel worthless and unwanted. He'd been documenting it all with the cold precision of a businessman who'd built an empire by paying attention to details others missed. The chaos that erupted was immediate and ugly. My uncle started shouting about legal challenges and mental incompetence. My aunt began sobbing dramatically, claiming her father had lost his mind in his final years and couldn't have understood what he was doing. Brittany screamed that this was unfair, that she'd been counting on her inheritance to pay off her credit cards and student loans and fund her lifestyle. "But there's more," the lawyer said calmly, waiting for the tantrum to subside. "The will specifically states that any attempt to contest these decisions will result in the entire estate being donated to charity. Furthermore, any family member who harasses or threatens the primary beneficiary will forfeit any consideration for future discretionary distributions." My phone started buzzing immediately. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to catch up. Distant cousins who'd never remembered my birthday were texting heartfelt messages about family bonds and how much they'd missed having me in their lives. My aunt, who'd spent decades reminding me I wasn't really family, left a voicemail sobbing about how much she'd always loved me and how we needed to celebrate this blessing together. But I wasn't done learning about great-grandfather Elias's final gift. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope marked, "Read this alone," in his distinctive handwriting. He also gave me a second set of keys and explained that great-grandfather Elias had left specific instructions for me to visit his private office before making any decisions about the estate. I excused myself to the bathroom while my family continued their meltdown in the living room. Inside the envelope was a letter that made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my family. "Dear granddaughter," it began. "If you're reading this, then my suspicions about this family were correct. I've spent the last decade documenting every slight, every cruel comment, every time they made you feel less than human. But there's something else you need to know about why they really kept you at arm's length." The letter went on to explain that my father wasn't some random teenager who'd abandoned my mom. He was my uncle's business partner, a married man with everything to lose. When mom got pregnant, the family made a deal. They'd support us financially but never acknowledge the truth. My uncle had been paying hush money for 24 years to keep everyone quiet about the scandal. "Your uncle stole from the company to pay for his silence," the letter continued. "He's embezzled nearly $2 million over the years to cover the monthly payments and maintain your mother's cooperation. I have all the documentation locked in my office safe. The family business is actually bankrupt. They've been living off loans secured by my estate, assuming they'd inherit everything to cover their massive debts." My hands were shaking as I read the final paragraphs, each revelation hitting me like a physical blow. "The choice is yours. You can expose them and watch them lose everything, or you can let them continue living their lie. But remember, they made their choice about you a long time ago. They chose money and reputation over treating you like family. They chose their comfort over your dignity. They chose to protect a criminal rather than protect a child. Now you get to choose what they deserve." There's a second key in this envelope. It opens the file cabinet in my office. Everything you need is in there. Financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of every payment and every lie. Your uncle has been stealing from his own family for decades to protect a secret that was never yours to bear. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. P.S. Your biological father is worse than you know. I've been investigating him for years. He's hurt other girls, and your family helped cover it up to protect their business relationship. You deserve to know the full truth about what kind of people raised you. I sat on the bathroom floor, letter in my shaking hands, understanding finally why I'd never been welcomed. I wasn't just an inconvenience or a burden. I was living evidence of a crime and a family scandal that threatened everything they'd built their identity around. When I returned to the living room, my aunt was on her knees, literally begging me to share the inheritance. "The business needs help," she wailed. "We're family. Great-grandfather Elias wouldn't have wanted to destroy the family legacy. Think about all the employees who depend on the company. Think about the community impact." But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was watching my uncle, seeing him clearly for the first time, his nervous sweating, his inability to make eye contact, the way he kept checking his phone as if expecting terrible news, the way he'd positioned himself near the exit like he was planning to run. Later that afternoon, I drove to great-grandfather Elias's office using the address the lawyer had given me. It was in a separate building on the property, one I'd never been allowed to enter during my childhood visits. Inside, I found exactly what he'd promised: filing cabinets full of evidence, recordings of phone conversations between my uncle and biological father discussing payments and cover-ups, bank records showing systematic theft spanning decades, documentation of payoffs and hush money, photos taken with telephoto lenses of my uncle meeting with my biological father in parking lots and restaurants, a paper trail that would destroy multiple lives and reputations. But there was more. Great-grandfather Elias had been investigating my father as well. The man was a serial predator who'd been targeting teenage girls for years. My mom wasn't his first victim, and she wasn't his last. The family had helped cover up multiple crimes to protect their business relationship and social standing. One file contained testimony from 3 other women who'd come forward privately about my father's behavior. Girls he'd assaulted when they were teenagers, threats he'd made to keep them quiet, payoffs their families had received to avoid pressing charges. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Another file contained financial records showing that my uncle's business partnership with my father had been incredibly lucrative. They'd made millions together in real estate deals, and my uncle had been terrified of losing that income stream if the truth came out about my father's criminal behavior. That evening, my aunt showed up at my apartment with tears streaming down her face and a bottle of expensive wine, as if this was a celebration we should be sharing instead of the reckoning it actually was. "Please," she begged. "The lawyer said you have complete discretion over the estate distribution. We need help desperately. The business is in serious trouble. If you could just loan us enough to get back on our feet, we'll pay you back with interest. We'll make you a partner. We'll do whatever you want." I let her talk for 45 minutes about family loyalty and second chances, about how they'd always loved me but hadn't known how to show it properly, about how great-grandfather Elias would have wanted the family to stick together through difficult times. The entire performance was masterful, complete with perfectly timed tears and strategic mentions of childhood memories that had never actually happened. She painted a picture of misunderstanding and miscommunication, as if 24 years of systematic exclusion was just a series of innocent mistakes. She talked about how proud they'd always been of my independence and strength, conveniently rewriting history to make their neglect sound like deliberate character building. "We were just trying to teach you self-reliance," she said through her tears. "We thought if you had to work for everything, you'd be stronger. We didn't want you to become spoiled like some of the other kids in the family." Finally, I cut her off. "I know about my father," I said quietly. Her face went completely white. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on my kitchen floor, red wine spreading across the linoleum like blood. "I know about the embezzlement. I know the business is bankrupt. I know you've been living off loans you can't repay. I know Uncle has been stealing money for 24 years to pay for your silence about a criminal who hurt children." She started stammering denials, but I held up the documentation great-grandfather Elias had left me. Bank records, recorded phone calls, evidence of systematic theft and fraud spanning decades, photos and documents that could destroy everything they'd built. "He knew everything," I said. "Every lie, every stolen dollar. Every time you made me feel like garbage to protect your secret. Every time you chose money over doing the right thing." My aunt collapsed into a chair, sobbing harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry. The perfect makeup she'd applied for this visit was running down her cheeks in black streaks, and her carefully styled hair was falling apart as she clutched her head in her hands. "We were protecting you," she whispered. "If people knew the truth about your father, it would have ruined your reputation too. We thought it was better if everyone believed he was just some teenager who ran away. We thought the financial support was enough." "No," I said. "You were protecting yourselves. You were protecting his marriage and his reputation and your money and your social standing. You were protecting a criminal who hurt children. I was just collateral damage in your cover-up." "But it's not just that," she sobbed. "Your father threatened us. He said if we ever exposed him, he'd destroy the business and ruin our family. He had connections, influence. We were scared of what he might do to all of us, so you sacrificed me instead," I said. "You let him continue hurting other girls rather than face the consequences of doing the right thing. You took his money and kept his secrets while treating me like garbage for existing." She had no answer for that. Over the next week, the family descended like vultures, sensing weakness. My uncle offered me a partnership in the business, conveniently forgetting it was worthless. Brittany invited me to be her maid of honor at her upcoming wedding, despite not speaking to me in 3 years. Even distant relatives I'd never met started calling with investment opportunities and business propositions. The transformation was sickening and completely transparent. Suddenly, I was brilliant and talented and such an important part of the family. My aunt started posting old photos of us together on social media with captions about how proud she'd always been of her special niece. My uncle began telling stories about how he'd always seen potential in me, conveniently rewriting decades of indifference and exclusion. The desperation was palpable. They offered me everything they'd denied me for years: family vacations, business partnerships, social connections, investment opportunities. All the things I'd watched them share with each other while excluding me were suddenly on the table. My uncle even offered to put my name on the family business, making me an equal partner with full decision-making authority. He presented detailed plans for expansion and modernization, as if I hadn't just learned the company was bankrupt and built on stolen money. But the worst was my mom. She'd been living in a small apartment, working as a waitress, never asking the family for more than the basic support they provided. When she learned about the inheritance, she finally told me her side of the story, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. I was 16 and stupid, she said. He was 28 and married with 2 kids. When I got pregnant, his wife threatened to destroy both our families if I ever told anyone the truth. She said she'd make sure I never worked anywhere in town, that my parents would lose their jobs, that our whole family would be ruined. Your uncle made the deal to keep everyone quiet and prevent a huge scandal. He said it was better for everyone, especially for you, if we just kept quiet and took the money. He promised the payments would continue until you were 18, that we'd be taken care of. You let them treat me like garbage for 24 years to protect a lie, I said. I thought it was better than the truth, she whispered. I thought if people knew your father was a married man who'd abandoned us, it would be worse for you growing up. I thought the monthly support was worth the price of silence. I was just a kid myself, and I was scared. Worse than growing up thinking I wasn't wanted by anyone? Worse than believing I was some kind of burden that nobody could love? She had no answer for that question. We sat in silence for 20 minutes while she cried, and I processed the magnitude of the deception that had shaped my entire life. But there's more you need to know, she finally said. Your father didn't just abandon us. He threatened me. He said if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure something bad happened to you. He knew where we lived, where you went to school. I was terrified he'd hurt you to keep me quiet. I also learned that my father had been paying my uncle not just for silence, but for active protection. When other victims tried to come forward over the years, my uncle had used his business connections to discredit them, threaten them, or buy their silence. The conspiracy went much deeper than just covering up my existence. The family lawyer called me into his office the following week. He explained that I had complete control over the estate and how it was distributed. I could save the family business. I could pay off their debts. I could restore their comfortable lifestyle and maintain the status quo that had kept them comfortable for decades. Or I could let them face the consequences of their choices. What would you do? I asked him. He smiled grimly. I've been handling your great-grandfather's affairs for 30 years. He was a hard man, but he was fair. He believed people should face the consequences of their actions. He spent months agonizing over this decision, but ultimately decided that character matters more than blood relations. He paused, looking at me carefully. He also said, you were the only one in the family who'd made something of yourself without asking for help. You put yourself through nursing school. You've been supporting your mother. You've never asked them for anything, even when you were struggling. He respected that independence and integrity. Your great-grandfather also left instructions about your biological father, he continued. There's enough evidence to have him prosecuted for multiple crimes. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on several cases. The choice about what to do with that information is also yours. He told me about the other victims who'd been silenced over the years. Young women whose families had been paid off or threatened into submission. A pattern of abuse that had continued for decades while my family profited from their partnership with a predator. That night, I made my decision. I called a family meeting at great-grandfather Elias's house. Everyone came, hoping for good news about debt forgiveness and financial salvation. I stood in the same living room where they'd excluded me from conversations for decades, but this time, I was the one with all the power. I've decided what to do with the inheritance, I announced. Their faces were hopeful, expectant. My aunt was actually wringing her hands with anticipation. My uncle had prepared a whole presentation about restructuring the business and making me a full partner. I'm keeping it all. The room erupted like a bomb had gone off. My uncle started yelling about family loyalty and legal obligations. My aunt accused me of being vindictive and ungrateful. Brittany called me selfish and heartless, screaming that I was destroying the family out of spite and jealousy. I waited for them to finish their tantrum, standing perfectly still while they raged around me. You spent 24 years showing me I wasn't family, I said calmly when the noise died down. You made that choice consistently and deliberately. You chose to protect a criminal over protecting a child. You chose money over morality. You chose to enable a predator rather than face the consequences of doing the right thing. Now you get to live with the consequences. You can't do this, my uncle shouted. We raised you. We supported you. We've been family to you when no one else would. You owe us everything you have. I pulled out great-grandfather Elias's documentation and dropped it on the coffee table like a bomb going off. With stolen money, I said. Money you embezzled from the family business. Money you used to buy your silence about my father and protect your reputations while enabling a criminal to hurt other children. The fight went out of them instantly. My uncle's face went gray. My aunt stopped crying. Brittany's mouth hung open as she stared at the evidence spread across the table. I could have you prosecuted, I continued, I could expose everything to the authorities and the community. I could make sure your father faces justice for what he did to multiple victims. I could destroy your reputations and see you all in prison. But I'm not going to do that. Hope flickered in their eyes like candle flames in a windstorm. I'm going to let you face the consequences naturally, I said. No more loans secured by this estate. No more family money to bail you out of the holes you've dug. No more cover-ups or protection from the truth. You made your choices about honesty and family loyalty. Now live with them. But I am going to do one thing, I added. I'm going to help the other victims get justice. I'm going to make sure my father pays for what he did, even if you won't. The begging started immediately. Promises to change. Offers of partnerships and shared decision-making. Desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of compromise that would save them from financial ruin and social disgrace. But I was done listening. I walked out of that house and never looked back, leaving them with their tears and their desperation and their consequences. 6 months later, the family business went bankrupt. My uncle and aunt lost their house, their cars, their social standing, their country club membership, everything that had defined their identity. Brittany had to drop out of law school and get a job at a retail store, selling clothes to the kind of people she'd once looked down on. The extended family scattered, unable to maintain their lifestyle without the regular infusions of embezzled money. Cousins who'd never worked a day in their lives suddenly found themselves applying for entry-level positions. The comfortable world they'd built on stolen money and covered-up crimes collapsed completely. My uncle tried to get a job at other companies, but word had spread about the business failure and the reasons behind it. Nobody wanted to hire someone whose company had collapsed so spectacularly and mysteriously. My aunt, who'd never worked outside the home, struggled to find employment that could support their new reality of apartments and used cars and grocery store brands. My mom struggled the most. Without the family support payments, she had to work double shifts just to pay rent. Part of me felt guilty watching her suffer for choices she'd made when she was barely older than a child herself. But then I remembered all the times she'd sat silently while they treated me like garbage. All the times she could have stood up for me but chose their money instead. All the years she'd let me believe I was unwanted rather than tell me the truth about why they kept us at a distance. I used the inheritance to start a foundation for teenage mothers and survivors of sexual assault. Kids who found themselves in impossible situations, facing judgment and abandonment from their families. I gave them what my family never gave me: support without conditions, respect without shame, opportunities without strings attached. The foundation provided housing assistance, educational scholarships, job training, legal support, therapy services, and most importantly, a community of people who understood what it felt like to be rejected by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. Our first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old whose parents had kicked her out when she refused to get an abortion. Our second was a 16-year-old whose family had disowned her for reporting her assault to police. Story after story of young women abandoned by the people who should have protected them. We also started a program to help victims of sexual assault get justice. We hired lawyers, funded investigations, and provided support through the legal process. Within 2 years, we'd helped prosecute 12 cases that police had previously ignored or dismissed. The first case we took on was my biological father. With great-grandfather Elias's evidence and testimony from the other victims, the case was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. My mother testified at his trial, finally finding the courage to tell the truth publicly. 3 years later, I was featured in a magazine article about young philanthropists making a difference. The reporter asked about my inspiration for the foundation. I grew up believing I wasn't worth anything, I said. My family made it clear through their actions that I was a burden and an embarrassment. They chose to protect a criminal rather than protect a child. I want to make sure no kid ever feels that way again, and no criminal gets away with hurting children because families are too worried about their reputation to do the right thing. The article ran with photos of me at the foundation office, surrounded by young mothers and assault survivors who'd graduated from our programs, women who'd become nurses and teachers and lawyers and business owners despite starting with nothing and facing seemingly impossible odds. My phone rang that night. It was my aunt. "I saw the article," she said. "I'm proud of you for what you've accomplished." "No, you're not," I replied. "You're angry that I'm successful without you. You're angry that I didn't need your approval to matter. You're angry that I found a way to help people you would have dismissed as worthless." She was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," she finally admitted. "I am angry. We could have been part of this success. We could have shared in your achievements and your recognition. We could have been a real family. You had 24 years to include me," I said. "You chose differently every single time. You chose to protect a criminal. You chose money over morality. You chose reputation over truth. Can't we start over?" she asked. "Can't we be family now that you've proven yourself? Can't we put the past behind us?" I thought about great-grandfather Elias watching from his armchair all those years, about the documentation he'd carefully collected, about the choice he'd given me between revenge and justice. "Family isn't just blood," I said. "It's how you treat people when they can't do anything for you. It's about protecting the vulnerable instead of protecting the powerful. You showed me for decades how you really felt about family values." I hung up and blocked her number permanently. Last month, I got a wedding invitation from Brittany. She'd met someone who didn't care about her family's financial troubles or social status. The invitation was beautiful and expensive despite their reduced circumstances, probably funded by credit cards or loans they couldn't afford. At the bottom, in elegant script, was a note. "Your presence would mean everything to us. We've missed having you in our lives and want to start fresh as a family." I threw it in the trash without a second thought. Some people think I'm bitter. that I should forgive and move on. They don't understand that forgiveness doesn't require giving people access to hurt you again. They spent my entire life showing me exactly who they were. I finally believed them and acted accordingly. The foundation has helped over 800 young mothers and assault survivors get their lives back on track. Some have gone to college, others have started businesses. All of them learned they were worth more than their circumstances suggested, something my own family never taught me. We've also helped prosecute 43 sexual assault cases, including the one against my biological father. When the other victims came forward, the evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. My mother testified at his trial, finally finding the courage to tell the truth publicly. During his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched him try to maintain his composure as victim after victim described what he'd done to them. Some were women now, successful professionals who'd carried their trauma for decades. Others were still teenagers, barely older than my mother had been when he hurt her. The judge was particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks. "You preyed on children," he said. "You used your position of power and influence to silence your victims and avoid consequences. You corrupted an entire family to protect your crimes. The sentence I'm imposing reflects the gravity of your actions and the lasting harm you've caused." My uncle was also prosecuted for his role in the cover-up and the embezzlement. He received 7 years for financial crimes and obstruction of justice. My aunt avoided prison but lost everything else: the house, the cars, the social standing, the comfortable life built on blood money and covered-up crimes. At our annual gala last year, one of our scholarship recipients gave a speech about second chances and the power of choosing your own family. She talked about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that saves someone else. Sitting in that ballroom, surrounded by young women who'd overcome impossible odds, I finally understood what great-grandfather Elias had given me. Not just money, but the power to choose who deserved my energy, my love, my trust. I chose them. I chose me. I chose justice over comfort and truth over family loyalty. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged at the table. The foundation now operates in 22 states and 3 countries. We've expanded our programs to include financial literacy, career counseling, mental health support, legal advocacy, and emergency housing. Every young woman who walks through our doors gets what I never had: unconditional support, and the message that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or actions. We've also partnered with law enforcement agencies to improve how they handle sexual assault cases involving minors. Too many victims never get justice because their families prioritize reputation over truth. We're working to change that culture, one case at a time. My family still occasionally reaches out through mutual acquaintances, testing the waters to see if enough time has passed for reconciliation. The answer is always no. Some wounds don't heal. Some choices can't be undone. Some people don't deserve second chances when they've shown you who they really are for decades. I've built a new family now. Women who've overcome impossible odds, staff members who believe in second chances for victims, not perpetrators, donors who understand that sometimes love means holding people accountable for their choices and protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. Great-grandfather Elias's final gift wasn't just financial freedom. It was the permission to walk away from people who diminish you, no matter what blood you share. It was the understanding that real family lifts you up instead of tearing you down. 5 years later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. But I recognized my uncle's handwriting immediately. He was writing from prison, where he was serving his sentence for embezzlement and obstruction of justice. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he wrote, "but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just because we got caught, but because of what we did to you. You deserved better. You deserved a family that protected you instead of sacrificing you for money and reputation. I've had a lot of time to think about the choices I made, about how we treated you, about the man I protected and the crimes I helped cover up. There's no excuse for what I did. No justification that makes it right. Your great-grandfather tried to warn me years ago. He said I was walking down a path that would destroy everything I claimed to care about. He was right. I lost my family, my business, my freedom, my self-respect, all to protect a secret that wasn't worth protecting. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that every good thing you've done with that inheritance is something we could never have accomplished. You turned our failure into something beautiful. You saved people we would have ignored or dismissed. I hope someday you can find peace with what happened. Not for our sake, but for yours." I read the letter once and threw it away. Some apologies come too late. Some damage can't be undone with words. But that night, I thought about the foundation and all the lives we'd changed, about the women who'd found their voices, the children who'd been protected, the criminals who'd finally faced justice. Maybe that was enough. Maybe turning pain into purpose was the best kind of revenge. Last week, I got a call from a 17-year-old girl whose family had disowned her for reporting her stepfather's abuse. She'd heard about our foundation and was desperate for help. Her voice reminded me of my own at that age. Scared, alone, convinced she was worthless. By the time we hung up, she had a place to stay, a lawyer willing to take her case, and a full scholarship to nursing school. She had hope again. That's when I knew great-grandfather Elias had been right. Some people get what they deserve, and some people deserve better than what they get. I sleep well at night knowing I chose to be the person who helps people get what they deserve, the good kind of what they deserve. My family's money is gone. Their reputation is ruined. Their comfortable lifestyle is just a memory. But I'm building something better than they ever had. A legacy of helping people instead of hurting them. And that feels like the best revenge of all. The foundation continues to grow. We're opening our 5th residential facility next month, and we've helped change legislation in 8 states to better protect young victims of sexual assault. We've also started a program to train other families how to support children who come forward about abuse, because too many families still choose silence over justice. Every year on the anniversary of great-grandfather Elias's death, I visit his grave. I bring flowers and update him on what we've accomplished with his gift. I tell him about the women who've graduated from our programs, the criminals who've been prosecuted, the families who've chosen truth over comfort. I think he'd be proud. Not of the revenge, he was too wise for that, but of the justice. Of turning inherited pain into inherited hope. Some stories don't have happy endings, but some stories have necessary endings. And sometimes the best thing you can do with a broken family is build a better one from scratch. I learned that I was worth something after all, just not to the people who should have known it first.